I'd like to welcome everybody to the State Capitol, room 403. Today's meeting, the Committee on House and Science and Technology on Blockchain Technology is going to go ahead and get started. Again, really appreciate everyone making the commitment to come today. We've got a number of members that have sent their regrets that they can't make it. Others are in traffic. I understand there's a shutdown of a lot of the roads in the vicinity of the Capitol that's delaying people, so I'm sure we're going to have some folks that perhaps of no result of their own going to be here a little late today. But I'd like to thank everybody for being here that could make it on time. Again, we've got a busy scheduled presentation today. Before we get started, I do want to thank the Technology Association of Georgia, who's been a great friend of this committee for some time, for helping arrange the speakers. What we do as a committee, as many committee members know, is we try to balance our off-session time between pursuing issues and problems and thinking about opportunities that have not perhaps been addressed in anything legislative in the past, but that we want to be able to think about as we sort of look over the horizon. Where could issues emerge in our education system, in our legal system, or otherwise, so we can be mindful as a committee in our sort of advice and consent role as legislators. I'd like to thank everybody for being here today. And with that, I'd like to recognize Mr. Larry Williams, the CEO of the Technology Association, to give us some opening remarks. Larry.
Mr. Chair, committee members, thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Larry Williams. I'm the president and CEO of the Technology Association of Georgia, TAG, as most people know it. And I like to say that's your technology association. We are statewide, and we continue to grow. We are lucky enough to be able to turn 21 next year, and so we have a long history, and we've grown significantly. A couple points of pride about TAG. One is we are 30,000 members strong. And that makes us the largest statewide technology association in the country. So that's here in Georgia, and no West Coast state can claim that. So we're excited. Thank you for having us here today. And one of the things that we do at TAG is really think about the current trends, about where technology and innovation are going. And Georgia really continues to be set to help lead in a lot of areas. And we think about areas where Georgia leads. Fintech, cybersecurity, digital health are all areas. And as we think about a current trend that's growing, blockchain is one of those. Blockchain is often thought of in the context of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin and others, but there's actually much broader applications. We've worked very hard with the state legislature over the years to make sure that Georgia is a top 5 technology state. We are a top 5 technology state. I say that we can say that with confidence. We don't have to say it with arrogance. We've earned our seat at the table, so to speak. And now it's about this elevation of continuing to stay at the forefront of innovation and make sure that we continue to be a global hub for innovation. And I think that's our aspiration, and that's in a lot of ways we're there, but we want to continue to make sure that we're at the forefront of that legislation. So for today, Mr. Chair, I want to talk a little. We're going to dig down into the blockchain a little bit. Got a great group of experts. I'm going to talk a little bit about what TAG's been doing on the subject, and then on the agenda, you'll see different parts of it. So we're going to talk about sort of some introductory parts of blockchain, what's going on with it. We're going to dig a little deeper. We're going to talk about what's going on in Georgia right now in blockchain, and then some things that we can do possibly together to keep us at the forefront of this innovation and lead to the great job creation and keeping that industry here and helping that industry grow here. So I think we got a couple slides, and then I'll...
Larry, before we go on, let me ask this question, just kind of a fun question. You know, so we know we're a top 5 technology state. You know, as a prosperous state of 11 million people, where would we rank? Have you ever looked in terms of GDP associated with technology or innovation, where we rank among the nations of the world? I mean, I know, California touts itself as the number 5 economy in the world, behind the United States, China, Japan, and Germany. They would say they're number 5, even when compared to other nation states. Where would Georgia? I just Any idea where Georgia would
From a global scale, I have not. But I'll take the challenge and go back and see if we can come up with that data and where we would land on a comparative basis.
I think that's meaningful too. Saying we're number 4 in the United States sometimes doesn't tell the story about how much good's really going on.
It
from a
really
global
is,
perspective.
and I appreciate the question. It's and I often describe Georgia as where technology meets the real world, because sometimes we don't have the shiniest new gadgets or the coolest new social apps, but we have more companies that are developing and driving revenue using technology than I think anywhere else. And it makes companies like Coca-Cola, Home Depot, UPS, which are definitely tech-enabled, but they're also driving innovation. If you look at UPS just rolling out the first drone fleet, that's all headquartered here. So this exciting things, and that's why I say that we can we can claim this with confidence. Okay. One thing, as we started thinking about this at TAG, it really was, okay, there's a lot of buzz, a lot of this word blockchain being thrown around. So what's going on in Georgia, and what's our opportunities here? So the way that we approached that challenge was we wanted to learn more about what blockchain means. So it's not only about cryptocurrency, but there are great applications actually across the board. So everything, supply chain, logistics, digital health, and others. And what we really did is, so what you'll see later in the presentation is where our strengths are today, because we've got a lot of strengths. We've got a lot going on in Georgia with blockchain. And then our approach about what we could do. And so as we pulled together a task force on blockchain, we really thought of a vision of how do we position Georgia as a global hub for blockchain technology, and what would it take to get there. And then, of course, as a membership organization, we thought, what would the competitive advantage for a TAG member be if we were to do this? And so we worked on some structure to pull together that industry. So we've had a lot of meetings, we've had a lot of roundtables, we've had some private dinners that have included top leadership at some of our corporations, Coca-Cola, First Data, NCR, UPS, as I've mentioned, Home Depot, have all been around the table, and then also a lot of the startup community as well that's building things. And you'll see later that we have got robust activity on this, to the point that we can even claim, now I'm going to go back to cryptocurrency, we can actually claim that 80% of all commercial cryptocurrency transactions in the world are processed through Georgia. And it's because of a company called BitPay that has the most adopted platform to be able to enable that. So we're already leading, but we talked about how we can promote, and then the legislative agenda that we'll talk about and educate. So that's how we're organizing this. There's so much momentum going on, and from a TAG perspective, we're going to move this task force for this original getting our idea about what's going on from a task force, and we're going to create it into one of our full societies. Our societies are 26 societies that we have to organize around different sectors and industry trends. So that's really what we want to accomplish today, Mr. Chair and committee, and delighted to be here, and thank you for the time to give these introductory remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. You do have a question. Chair recognizes Representative McLeod for a question.
Good morning, Mr. Williams. Okay, I'm just not clear what exactly blockchain is. So I want a little bit more understanding of what it's supposed to do, what the goal is, mission, and what kind of support you're looking for from us in that sense.
Okay, that's so Dr. Roop Singh is going to follow me, and he's going to begin that presentation about that. Great segue.
Any other questions?
I'll wait for the doctor, right?
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none, Mr. Williams, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And Chair would like to recognize Mr. Singh. Welcome.
Good job.
My name is Roop Singh, and thank you for having me. Just a quick clarification, I am not by education a doctor. I think Larry gave me an honorary degree. So in any case, let's just get into it. So thanks for having me here. And we'll talk about what is blockchain. But before that, I would like to share where I think in the evolution of technology and society we are. So I would like to take your attention back a few years, maybe perhaps to 1800s, 1860s. When steam engine was just invented and railroads were just being adopted. And as we go back to 1860s, just imagine those times when railroads were being adopted. That changed where we lived, who we met, what we traded, what we ate, what we wore. It changed the nature of commerce, it changed the nature of peace, and it changed the nature of war. It brought on what we then call the Industrial Revolution. So imagine that impact. That is the juncture that we stand at today in terms of evolution of technology and blockchain. It will shape the fourth industrial revolution, and in my presentation, I aim to show you how. So coming to your question, what is blockchain? Technically speaking, blockchain is a cryptographically secure distributed ledger with a shared state. All that mumbo jumbo, what does that mean? So let's take a metaphorical example. Let's say that the four of us were in a set of transactions. I sent some money or some units to Chairman Ed, and then he sent it to Larry, and then Larry sent some back to me. In the old days, we would keep a record of those transactions on us, meaning I would have a sheet of paper, I would write down what did I send to Chairman Ed, what did he send to Mr. Larry, et cetera, et cetera. Now let's say how we can improve that system from that point on. Let's say we publish those transactions on a metaphorical wall in front of us. Let's say everything that we did amongst the three of us is published at the moment that it is done in front of a shared wall that everybody can see. And hence what that does is it establishes a statement of truth. It says these are the set of transactions, and we all agree that this is the set of transactions that we agreed to, and it's public. And to secure that nobody else could change that set of transactions, let's use some mathematics or cryptography to ensure that that cannot be changed. Now this sounds really complicated, but it's really quite simple. Blockchain is a foundational technology. It's akin to what was the internet. So today we use the internet, but we don't even question how the internet works. I mean, you all send pictures and videos and emails on the internet. Do you ever wonder how does the TCP/IP protocol works? So we will get to that level of understanding and adoption using blockchain. And in the next few slides, I would like to show where those applications lie. So as I was saying before, blockchain is nothing but distributed ledger and encryption. And that too, it started with military-grade encryption, where you could send messages or transactions, but the people who are not privy to those transactions, who don't have the keys to look at that transaction, cannot see what the transaction is. Here's another metaphor to think about. Let's say that you want to send somebody a message, and you write that message on a piece of paper, and you put it in a P.O. box. But only you have the key to the P.O. box because you were able to open the P.O. box and put the message in there. And then then the receiver, who's the intended receiver of the message, has the key to the P.O. box. They can open the P.O. box, read the message. But nobody else has the key to the P.O. box, so they won't be able to see what the message is. So that's, in a way, how encryption would work to secure the set of transactions that we're trading with each other. So as I said, blockchain is a foundational technology with a number of use cases. We typically hear about them in terms of cryptocurrencies. So all these words that you've heard probably in the media, Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. These are all forms of cryptocurrencies, and we'll get a little bit deeper into what that means. And cryptocurrency is one type of use case for blockchains. Here's another type of use case. We could tokenize a number of different physical assets that exist in the world today. So for instance, this building. Well, let's take a building that could be tokenized, and let's take a famous hotel down the street. Could you own fractional ownership of that hotel, and could you trade that fractional ownership globally? The answer is no, because we don't have those instruments. We are moving towards a world where using blockchain, we can tokenize, i.e. create digital twins of physical assets and secure them using cryptography, and then develop asset marketplaces to trade those assets. Let's look at some industry use cases for blockchain.
And Mr. Singh, I have a question for you. Okay, so let's explore the tokenization value. So talk about a couple practical things for, say, mom and dad. For example, they have assets that can't be easily monetized. You can't monetize your car very easily. You can't monetize your house without taking out a loan that's a home equity loan or something. Are you talking about being able to monetize things that you have ownership of and value in ways that couldn't in the past?
Absolutely, that's a
you
very
speak
good
that
way to put it. I couldn't have said it better. So think about fine art. There's a piece of Van Gogh painting. Could you own fractional ownership of it today? Probably not. You have to buy the whole painting if you wanted to. But there's a way to monetize using cryptography and creating digital assets out of an art that you can then trade amongst anybody who wants to trade it with you, and you can create a value out of it. Very similarly, we will also see other collectibles. So you could have collectibles in the house that today you couldn't monetize, but now you can. I think we will also come into an era where shares and equities of companies will be digital assets that will be traded on blockchain. I think we are just starting that journey. But if you look at major companies like Fidelity, they're already exploring that path. So we'll get into a little bit more into different use cases of that.
So you've got the tokenization or the ability to monetize ownership interests and things. Is that really the extent of the example you used, or were there other things you'd like to, sort of mom and pop examples you wanted to speak to?
So the way I see it is, blockchain gives us a few things. There is the power of immutability. Once you publish these transactions, so to say, on a shared wall, we couldn't change it. Nobody could change it. They are considered immutable. So hence, we can now use that as a proof of ownership, as a proof of authorship for content, for media, for videos and songs and any kind of content that you create. Or you could think of blockchain also as a mechanism of transparency. We could track assets. We could track assets from how they move from one party to the other. We could track medicines. We could track spinach. We could track. So here's an example, agricultural example for a state that's big in agriculture. We could track organic produce. How do you prove that this produce is actually organic? You could track that chain of that custody from the field to the table, and blockchain would enable that.
And from a security standpoint, is it true that you could, you don't have to spend the resources or don't have to worry about securing your ownership interest? For example, you mentioned intellectual property, because everyone can see that you used to own it, and you have it's like a chain of title almost.
Exactly, and that's one of the very interesting public sector use cases. So you'll see governments across the world, and you brought this up before, there are governments in Sweden and Switzerland that have started to put land titles on the blockchain so that everybody knows whose property is this. Right? Back in the day, and in some developing countries still, how does that work? We write it on piece of papers, and that's sitting in some shelf in the back room. So we can now evolve to a blockchain-based title record where the ownership of the title can be tracked easily.
I do have a question. Do you have a minute?
Yeah.
To recognize Representative McLeod.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm kind of getting a little bit of it's foundational technology that ensures that data kind of remains unchanged. But then you said creating value. How is value going to be determined? Say if I blockchain something in my house, how do you determine value?
So the question of value is a much broader question. The value is determined by the market, if you will, right? So what blockchain allows you to do is to store it securely and to quote unquote tokenize it so it can be shared and traded. But what is the value of whatever asset that you're trading? I'll give you an example. We all have digital identities these days, right? We have a set of data that we share online on various platforms. If I were to ask you what is the value of that, well, it depends on what somebody's willing to pay for it.
Always, value is always that.
Right? So I think what blockchain does is enables the sharing of these assets, and then we will evolve into secondary marketplaces where we could have peer-to-peer transactions. You can tell me what you want to buy for how much, and I can, if I'm willing, I can trade that with you.
Almost like bartering?
Basically. So what it allows to do, this brings up a really interesting point. In this set of transactions, or the value chain that we have created in today's world, there are a lot of intermediary parties. So what blockchain allows to do is to cut those intermediaries out. We can develop more peer-to-peer models where you can go on a platform and trade things of value with each other and remove the intermediaries that do not add any value to the process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, cutting out the middleman.
Yeah. So let's talk about, if there are any other, if I can move on, yeah? Okay. Let's talk about some public sector use cases for blockchain. One of them we already talked about, identity. So I think all forms of identity eventually will be on a blockchain-based network. So your driver's license, your state ID, or any other form of university ID, they will eventually be on a secure blockchain-based network and a platform. Title records, any kind of records you could think of. And there are governments across the world, and Austin Mills from Morris Manning and Martin will get into more details on those regulations and what's happening around the world, but there are examples of such things already being implemented. There's another interesting use case that we already picked up on, is the supply chain, but let's apply it to agriculture. We can prove what is the organic produce versus what's not. We can also track medicines. Think of any critical asset. How does it move from its point of origin to its point of consumption? We can develop blockchain-based platforms that can track that and report that quickly and easily, much more easier or much more visible than today's set of technology. So moving on, what we've seen in the last few years, the supply chain and IoT, which is essentially sensor-based technologies, and identity use cases have risen as primary focus in the past year. So if you poll companies, they will tell you that they're looking for blockchain as a platform for digital records, for digital identity, for Internet of Things, sensor-based applications, etc. So that momentum is building, and as we see, you'll see a lot of companies investing in it. So there are over 80 corporations that are investing in experimenting with different kinds of use cases. So we are now getting from a point of just experimentation for the last 7 to 5 years into feasibility at scale and into actual implementation of those technologies in products, in companies' critical infrastructure. We're not there yet, but we're starting to get into that phase. So if you look at the journey, this is where we are. And I think in about 5 to 7 years from now, we can talk about mainstream adoption, where we will have consumer products, we will have a lot of companies developing products and using blockchain as their underlying critical infrastructure for data sharing. So the question becomes, what can blockchain do for you? I see this on a scale. We can have tactical use cases within companies, so we can replace all technology legacy systems. We can reduce the technical debt. We can automate inefficient processes, and to me, that is one of the biggest value adds for blockchain. It forces you to automate. It forces you to bring partners and supply chain partners together that add value and create much more efficient processes amongst themselves. We can then move into more strategic areas like deploying a shared layer of trust. So let me speak to a little bit more on that. To me, blockchain is a mechanism of trust efficiency, meaning we create trust today in the world between companies, between consumers and companies, but we do that by spending a lot of effort, by spending a lot of resources on technology, on human resources, et cetera, et cetera. Blockchain allows us to create that shared layer of trust much more efficiently. And if you get into much more strategic use cases, we can enable growth, we can develop new products, we can develop new markets. So I'll give you a very esoteric example, which hopefully will make sense in terms of developing new markets. So if you have kids, or if you've been one of those people that collected baseball cards when you were a kid, these are collectibles. There are similar collectibles today in forms of sneakers. So we're now seeing Nike has announced that they will create crypto-based sneakers, which are essentially cryptographically secured art or digital assets that can be traded. These, to me, are examples of developing new markets. These collectibles market can now be developed. It's a very esoteric sort of offbeat example, but I use that to just expand the lens here. So eventually what we're looking to do through blockchain is to enable new business models. So I'll end with a few predictions. I think directionally we can evolve to trade finance and retail payments using smart contracts and cryptocurrencies. I think within the next 5 years you'll see a large number, up to 30, maybe even 40% of trade finance payments being done on cryptographically secured blockchain networks using smart contracts. Distributed ledgers will become the underlying secure data sharing layer for all critical data, such as IoT generated, sensor generated data. And as autonomous vehicles, autonomous technologies, and AI gets more and more developed and adopted, blockchain will become the underlying layer to share data securely amongst all those devices.
So in actual fact, you're saying maybe we did things backwards in technology? Is this kind of more foundational, like it should have been built, our technology should have been built probably this way first, and instead of, yeah.
So if you look at the evolution of technology, cloud computing was sort of the next evolution of what was originally internet, right? And to me, blockchain-based networks are the next evolution of cloud, right? Although we had distributed computing for years, this is not, in that sense, a new technology. It's just the recipe is new. We've had distributed computing since the internet started. Now we're recognizing more and more applications of it. And it really came to the fore when a pseudonym called Satoshi Nakamoto put the two together with distributed ledger and cryptography to create the peer-to-peer digital cash system, what we call today Bitcoin. Right? So he just put he or she, we don't know who that entity is, but they just put the recipe together. Those ingredients were there already. So now, yes, sir.
There's one more question. Is that Representative Davis' question?
I can remember being a real estate agent and having to run back and forth, getting people to sign signatures, whereas today, everything is done on the computer. Even when it comes to exchanging finances, they want everything through the computer. So you're saying that we're moving to a point where the manual of going back and forth, which is time consuming, needless to say, can be condensed into something more practical and time saving, such
Absolutely.
as doing it over the computer. And I think my father was over in Maryland planning on to move here, and we were able to do the transaction over the computer with him signing a signature, everything, even though he was in a different state. So we're getting ready to expand that beyond real estate to be money in other industries.
Yep, we're on the same track. So
Okay.
let's actually take that example that you mentioned. My question then next would be, where are those documents stored? Today, we store them in databases. That's a technology we've used for the last, 30 years, 40 years, right? So databases are susceptible to things called hacks and breaches. Right. So if you've followed the news in the last 5 years, just remember the number of breaches. I could name a few.
Yeah.
So blockchain now allows us for a better underlying technology that is superior in terms of safety, in terms of security, in terms of storage. So I would store those documents onto a blockchain-based network.
But wouldn't we still have to, like, after the real estate transaction, I still have to file it with the clerk office
Mm-hmm.
in order for it to be valid per se.
Absolutely.
Are you saying now you'll be able to digitally
Mm-hmm.
do the same thing as opposed to like walking it up there or whatever?
Yeah, so I think the role
Well, I
of
mean, they're doing that now, but
Right.
yeah.
right, yeah, we're on the same page. So the role of how we prove the
Mhm.
authenticity of any asset, any document, or ownership of any identity, and the role of governments alongside with it is evolving. Right? So, the role of government will remain, but the technology they use and how they share it with the consumers will change. Right? Which is what basically the last point is here. So just to wrap up, I think all assets that we think of as assets, anything that is considered critical asset, meaning precious stones, real estate, art, even equities within companies, eventually everything that we could consider assets will be tokenized and hence traded easily and then traded globally in secondary markets, which will give rise to what we now call the Internet of Value. So blockchain will become the enabler of this whole transition into the fourth industrial revolution, Internet of Value, etc. So that's all I had. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any other questions from members? I do have, Mayor Mark.
What's the difference in PayPal and crypto currency?
Yes. Right. So let's think of the way I would describe there are two basic differences. One, PayPal, let's say, automated within the bounds of the current financial infrastructure, the way you could send money from one party to the other. But imagine who's in the middle of that exchange. Although it feels seamless to us as consumer,
Banks.
banks are. And here's the other party that's in the middle of that exchange. PayPal itself. Right? So that's the next evolution from where we were before, and they basically expose the inefficiencies of the previous set of financial infrastructure, and they created something more seamless. So now we're getting to a next evolution of it, where we could have more peer-to-peer, meaning me to you, without having too many third parties in the middle or service providers in the middle. That's one difference. The other difference is that cryptocurrencies themselves are, let's call them, a unique set of assets that we have created, the likes of which did not exist before. So we are still trying to categorize where do they belong. They're not something that we have seen before. It's not a like-to-like comparison. So think about it as digital cash that can be sent from one party to the other on the internet.
Who makes the profit on that transaction that eliminates the banks? The banks don't get the service. The banks don't get the profit. Who gets the profit in the Bitcoin transaction?
So specifically in Bitcoin, I wouldn't use the term profit, but there is fees involved. So it's a distributed network, meaning if all of us decided that we'll set up computer nodes which will run the Bitcoin software, we become the infrastructure provider in a way, versus having one company provide the infrastructure for such a transfer. Millions of nodes provide that. And then as the transactions happen, the people, the nodes that enable such transactions get a fee to complete and publish those transactions.
So a PayPal fee that I pay, we eliminate the bank and the PayPal transaction. The fee that I now pay to PayPal, where does that fee go in the Bitcoin? Does it to the group?
Correct. To the nodes that are enabling that infrastructure and completing the transaction.
And that equals an ownership interest. The node in
And Mr. Ching, I would say too, we've got someone that's going to be speaking on cryptocurrency transactions. So,
Right.
it's okay. I don't mind you addressing it, but there may be a better person to speak to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Mr. Tommy Marshall is going to speak to that, so he'll be happy to share his thoughts.
It's a great question. Do you?
done.
Okay. Any other questions? One last for Representative Davis.
I saw on the news where they were saying that there's a way that we as consumers should own our information
Mhm.
because data is collected every time when I buy groceries, when I go to the doctor, when I do pretty much anything. And people are selling that data,
Mm-hmm.
and I have no say whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
What you're talking about, would I be able to profit off of the data that people are collecting on me? Or yes or no? And if so, how?
So it's a broader topic again. I want to be mindful of time. I did give a TEDx talk on exactly that topic, who owns your digital identity. And I think we're moving into an era where we need to find ownership. I believe fundamentally we should own our own identity, and we should be able to trade it in the way that we want to, and we should be part of the compensation. Can that happen? That depends on how we evolve as a society, how business models evolve, etc. It's not the easiest thing to do because now we've created an economy which is based on user-based, user-generated data.
I would say this to Representative Davis's question, though. I do think if you wanted to, line your pros and your cons up, I think one would have to certainly say if a financial or digital footprint is akin to, for example, if you had a footprint, anywhere you walked on the beach, you could kind of find the footprints. I think the ability, I think it's fair to say, for forthright, blockchain will create a circumstance, if it becomes the basis of transactions, that your footprint will be there forever. You can never erase where you've been and achieve this concept of practical obscurity that you've sort of been forgotten about. Your footprints it'll be in concrete. Any transaction you engage in that has a blockchain technology undergirding it, your presence and your interaction there will never go away.
Sure, but in addition to that, it'll give you the opportunity to give consent for the use of such data. That's the distinction.
Perhaps.
Perhaps.
Thank you. Mr. Singh, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.